"Did you know your house is alive?" a voice whispered through the intercom speaker. I froze in front of the door, the key trembling in my hand. A second ago, the hallway lights had gone out, and the intercom had turned on by itself. I live alone. There's no one else in the building. The darkness pressed against my chest, and a cold wind from an open window struck my back. I pressed the intercom button, but there was only silence in response. Just a faint humming, like someone breathing into the microphone. I stepped back, scanning the empty hallway. The staircase was swallowed in darkness, and the elevator I had called never arrived. My phone showed no signal, even though I was standing in the city center. I tried to open the apartment door, but the key got stuck in the lock. Then I heard it again, the whisper, now closer, as if coming from inside the door. "Don't ignore." My heart pounded as I yanked the key and burst into the apartment, slamming the door shut behind me. Inside, it was quiet, but the wrong kind of quiet. The corridor lights flickered even though I hadn't turned them on. I rushed to the switch, but the light wouldn't respond. My gaze fell on the mirror in the hallway, and I wasn't alone in the reflection. A blurred silhouette stood behind me, like a shadow in the mist. I spun around, no one there. The mirror showed only me, but I felt a presence, the air around me thick and heavy. I turned on the flashlight on my phone and searched the apartment. Everything was in its place. Books on the shelves, dishes in the sink, laptop on the table. But something was wrong. My keys, which I had tossed onto the console, now lay perfectly arranged on the floor in a circle. I hadn't done that. A chill ran across my skin as I noticed the TV in the living room had turned itself on. Static filled the screen, but amidst the noise, faint outlines of a face appeared, a face I couldn't quite make out. I yanked the TV's plug from the outlet, but it didn't turn off. The voice from the intercom sounded again, now from inside the apartment. "You've been ignoring me too long." I rushed to the door, but it wouldn't open. The lock was jammed, and the key bent as if melted. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to breathe. This wasn't a prank or a technical glitch. Something in this house wanted my attention, and it wouldn't let go until I found out what was happening. I sat down on the floor, leaning against the wall, trying to think. I had moved here 3 months ago. The building was old, from the 1930s, with worn parquet floors and high ceilings. I hadn't noticed anything unusual, but neighbors always avoided talking about the house. Maybe I wasn't going crazy. Maybe the house really was alive, and it had just spoken to me. The next morning, I woke up on the hallway floor, clutching my phone. The intercom was silent, the door opened normally, and the key was intact. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching me. I checked the intercom, it was unplugged, its cord dangling, torn. The cameras in the entryway had recorded nothing but me standing in front of the door. But I knew I hadn't imagined that voice. Throughout the day, I tried to return to my routine, but the house wouldn't leave me alone. That evening, when I came back from work, all the light bulbs in the apartment flickered in unison, as if sending a Morse code. I recorded the rhythm on my phone. Short, long, short. It wasn't random. I tried turning the kitchen lights on, but they went out after a few seconds. The TV switched on again by itself, showing the same static noise. I felt the tension in the air thicken, as if someone was standing right behind me. I started recording everything on my phone, the flickering lights, the sounds, even my own thoughts. But after an hour, all the recordings disappeared. The phone showed an empty memory, even though I hadn't deleted anything. I checked my laptop, all my notes about the previous night were wiped clean. This couldn't be a coincidence. Something in the house didn't want me keeping any evidence. I felt like a mouse in a labyrinth, observed by some invisible entity. My paranoia grew. I stopped leaving the apartment for long periods, afraid of coming back to new surprises. At night, I heard footsteps in the other room, even though I lived alone. The bathroom mirror cracked without reason, and the faucet water sometimes ran red before clearing up. I couldn't sleep, constantly checking the doors and windows. But whatever I did, the house stayed one step ahead. I decided the only way to stop this was to understand what was happening. If it wasn't my imagination, the house had a story, and I needed to uncover it. I remembered that the neighbor from the first floor, Mrs. Maria, had once hinted that this house is special. She looked away when I asked what she meant. I decided to start with the city archives to find information about the building. If the house was alive, as the voice said, it had a past, and I was going to find it. I made a list: archives, talks with neighbors, checking the electricity. I didn't know what I was up against, but I wasn't going to give up. The house had challenged me, and I accepted. That evening, when the lights flickered again, I wasn't afraid. I said aloud, "Okay, let's play." And it seemed the house heard me. I went to the city archive to find documents about my building, but there were none. The building I lived in wasn't listed among the city's residential properties or in any historical registries. The archivist, an elderly man with trembling hands, just shrugged. Maybe the address was recorded wrong. But I knew the address by heart, 17, Lapova Street. I checked again, flipping through the yellowed papers, but it was as if the building had never existed. That was impossible. The building stood in the city center, seen by everyone. I took a photo of the facade to compare it with archive photos, but in the pictures, the house looked different. The windows were wider, the doors were different. A shiver ran down my spine. It wasn't just missing documents. Someone or something was hiding the truth. I decided to talk to the neighbors. I started with Mrs. Maria, who lived on the first floor. She invited me in for tea, but her hands trembled as she poured the water. I asked her about the house, about its history. She was silent for a long time, then muttered, "This house doesn't like being ignored." Her eyes darted around, as if afraid the walls could hear. I pressed her, but she only added, "Don't go where you shouldn't, boy." Other neighbors were even less talkative. The man from the third floor, who always smoked on his balcony, just said, "Don't ask questions and you'll be fine." A young couple from the fifth floor changed the subject the moment I mentioned the house. It wasn't ordinary indifference, they were afraid. I noticed no one lingered in the hallway longer than necessary. Even the kids playing ball outside never entered the building. I returned to my apartment, thinking about what I had heard. Mrs. Maria had mentioned being ignored. It reminded me of the intercom voice. Don't ignore. Maybe the house responded to attention. I decided to test this theory. That evening, I sat in the living room and said loudly, "Okay, I'm listening. What do you want?" The light stopped flickering. The silence became so thick I could hear my heartbeat. Then I noticed that my notebook, which I had left on the table, was open to a blank page. On it, 3 words were written, "Look underground." I hadn't written that. The pen lay beside it, untouched. My pulse quickened. This was no joke, no technical glitch. The house was communicating with me, and it was showing me the way. I realized the answers were hidden somewhere deep beneath the house. But how would I get there? And what would I find? I decided to act systematically and set up motion sensors and cameras throughout the apartment to capture any anomalies. But they only recorded my own movements. The cameras showed empty rooms, even though I clearly heard footsteps in the bedroom while standing in the living room. The sensors remained silent, even when dishes in the kitchen suddenly fell from the shelves. I checked the recordings every morning, but there was nothing except my reflection in the mirror, which sometimes seemed unfamiliar. It was frustrating. I knew I wasn't insane, but I had no proof. The footsteps occurred every night, always at the same time, 2:47 a.m. I tried leaving my phone recording, but it would turn off by morning. Once, I woke up cold and found the bedroom window open, though I was sure I had closed it. On the windowsill lay a small key I had never seen before. It was old, rusty, engraved with a spiral symbol. So I decided to leave a voice recorder running all night. I placed it in the living room next to the key and went to sleep. In the morning, the recorder was still on, but the battery had died. I plugged it into my laptop and listened. At first, silence, just my footsteps and the creak of the parquet. But at 2:47, the whispering began. A voice, low and inhuman, repeated my name, Alexei. Alexei. Then, a sound like metal tapping, and the words, "Open me." The recording cut off. I listened to it dozens of times, trying to catch the tone. The voice wasn't hostile, but it wasn't friendly either. It sounded insistent. I checked the key, but it didn't fit any lock in the apartment. I even tried it on the building's entrance door. No luck. Then I remembered the note in the notebook. Look underground. The key had to be linked to something in the basement or below. I started exploring the building. In the basement, there was a locked metal door I hadn't noticed before. On it, the same spiral symbol as on the key. I inserted the key, but it wouldn't turn. The door was sealed around the edges, as if someone had deliberately walled it shut. I knocked. A hollow sound echoed, as if there was a huge empty space behind it. My curiosity turned into obsession. I couldn't think about anything but the key and the door. The house was giving me clues, but each one led to more questions. I felt I was getting closer to something important, but at the same time, I was terrified I might uncover something better left buried. That evening, I heard the whisper again, this time from the kitchen, "You're almost there." I knew it was too late to turn back. I hired an electrician to check the wiring in the apartment, hoping the flickering lights and random appliance behavior were technical issues, but he said the system was perfect. He even joked that my bulbs had a mind of their own. However, when we were checking the meter, the kitchen lights went out without us touching anything. The electrician paled and left quickly, muttering that something wasn't right here. I was left alone, feeling like the house was laughing at my attempts to understand it. The anomalies intensified. The bathroom door would shut on its own, even though I had left it open. The faucets sometimes were in hot water even though the heater was off. Once, I found my shoes neatly placed inside the fridge. It wasn't scary, it was bizarre, as if the house was playing with me, testing my reactions. I started speaking aloud. If you want to tell me something, say it directly. But there was no response. So I decided to explore electromagnetic fields. I ordered a portable EMF meter, the kind used by ghost hunters. When it arrived, I scanned the apartment. Most rooms showed normal readings, but near the living room wall. I grabbed a heavy sledgehammer and smashed through the wall in the living room, hoping to find something that would explain the blue glow, but behind the bricks there was only emptiness. Not just a hollow space, but a deep tunnel that led downward into darkness. The air coming from it was as cold as that from a refrigerator and smelled of damp earth. I pointed my flashlight into it, but the beam didn't reach the bottom. It was impossible. My apartment was on the 3rd floor. There should have been only structural flooring beneath me. I tossed a coin into the tunnel to gauge its depth. The sound of it hitting something came several seconds later, faint and muffled. The tunnel was real, but where did it lead? I felt adrenaline mixing with fear. The building wasn't just hiding secrets, it was a secret itself. I remembered the note in the notebook. Look underground. This couldn't have been a coincidence. So I went to the city library to search for old blueprints of the building. In the architecture section, I flipped through dozens of folders, but once again, there was no mention of my building. Finally, in a box marked uncatalogued, I found a yellowed sheet, a building plan for 17 Lipova Street, dated 1923. On the blueprint, there was a marked underground room that didn't exist in any modern plans. It was located below the basement, with access through sealed doors. I compared the blueprint with the actual basement layout. The symbol on the doors, a spiral, was also on the plan, next to the note, energy node. What did it mean? I didn't know, but I felt I was getting closer to the truth. At the library, I also found an article about the engineer who had designed the building, Alexander Voigt. He disappeared in 1925, leaving behind only rumors about his energy experiments. When I returned home, I noticed that the tunnel in the wall was gone. The wall was whole again, as if I had never broken it. But on the floor lay the same spiral-marked key I had found earlier. I realized the building was playing with me, shifting reality. It didn't scare me, it irritated me. I said out loud, enough hiding. Show me what you want. In response, the television turned on, displaying the same blueprint I had seen at the library. The screen flickered, and an image of the basement doors appeared. I understood that the building wasn't just pointing the way, it was demanding action. I grabbed the key, the flashlight, and a crowbar. If the answers were hidden in that underground room, I would find them. But before heading down, I photographed the blueprint and sent it to my friend, an architect, just to have some backup. The building could change the rules again, but I was ready for its games. I descended into the basement with the crowbar and the key to open the sealed doors, but they were stronger than I had expected. The bricks around the frame seemed to be fused like concrete, and the key wouldn't turn in the lock. Symbols covered the doors, not just the spiral, but dozens of small markings resembling mathematical formulas. I tried to photograph them, but in the pictures the symbols blurred, as if the camera couldn't capture them. When I knocked on the door, I heard an echo like that of a vast hollow space. Something was waiting behind them. I tried breaking the bricks with the crowbar, but after a few strikes, the tool slipped from my hands, as if someone had ripped it away. The basement lights flickered, and I heard a whisper, now clearer, not like that. It was the same voice I had heard through the intercom, but it now sounded calmer, almost like a teacher correcting a student. I stepped back, feeling sweat running down my spine. The building wasn't just resisting, it was setting the rules. So I decided to decipher the symbols. I sent them to a friend, Anton, a cryptographer fascinated with ancient codes. A few hours later, he replied, "It's not a language or a cipher. It's something like a formula, but not a mathematical one, an energy formula. Like instructions for activating something." He added that he had seen similar signs in esoteric texts about consciousness storage. I didn't believe in mysticism, but Anton's words matched my findings about Engineer Voigt. I returned to the blueprints and noticed that the symbols on the door corresponded with marks on the plan. They indicated a sequence of actions. First listen, then touch, then open. I realized that using the crowbar had been a mistake. The building wanted me to listen. I knelt by the door and closed my eyes. At first, silence. Then I heard a faint humming, rhythmic, like a heartbeat, coming from behind the door. I touched the lock, as the instructions suggested. The key in my hand warmed up, and I felt a vibration. The lock clicked, but the door didn't open. I understood this was only the first step. The symbols on the door began to glow with a faint blue light, the same as I had seen in the tunnel. The humming grew louder, and I felt the floor trembling beneath my feet. I returned to the apartment to gather tools and prepare for another attempt at the sealed basement door, but the moment I crossed the threshold, every device in the house sprang to life. Light bulbs blazed, the TV flickered with static, and the microwave beeped, despite being unplugged. The voice from the intercom, which I hadn't fixed, boomed, "You're too close." It wasn't a threat, it was a statement. The house sensed I was nearing its secret, and it was reacting. I flipped the circuit breaker, but it made no difference. The lights kept burning, and the appliances hummed as if alive. I noticed my notes on the symbols, left on the table, now scattered across the floor. On one page, in handwriting not my own, was scrawled, "Don't rush." My heart tightened. The house wasn't just communicating, it was warning me. But I wasn't backing down. Therefore, I realized I had to proceed with caution. The house was protecting something in the underground room, and my persistence could trigger an uncontrollable response. I sat down and reviewed my records, the blueprint, Anton's words, the article about Voight. Everything pointed to the underground room being more than a storage space. It was the core of a system. Voight wrote about thought energy, and I hypothesized the house was a machine that collected and processed it. I returned to the basement, this time without a crowbar, armed only with the key and a flashlight. The door looked different. Its symbols glowed brighter, the humming clearer. I followed the sequence. Listen, touch. The hum intensified, and I felt the air vibrate. I inserted the key into the lock and said, "I'm not your enemy. Show me what's there." The lock clicked, and the door cracked open slightly. Beyond it was a dark corridor leading downward. The walls were covered in the same symbols, now pulsing as if alive. I took a step, but the floor trembled. A voice from the corridor's depths said, "Choose wisely." I stopped. This was a test. The house wasn't just guarding the room, it was judging whether I was worthy of entering it. I went back to the apartment to gather more information. Anton had sent a new message. The symbols were tied to Voight's experiments with collective memory. He suggested the house might store the memories of everyone who had lived here. I realized the underground room was the system's heart, and I had to prove to the house I wouldn't destroy it. That evening, the lights glowed softly, as if the house was awaiting my next move. I was ready. Fear was gone, replaced by cold, clear resolve. I was no longer a victim trembling at every sound. The house had challenged me, and I accepted it. I realized it wasn't an enemy but a partner in this game, and I had to respect its rules. My goal wasn't to destroy or conquer, but to understand. I sat at the table and devised a plan, cut the house's power to weaken its will, and navigate the corridor to the underground room. I reread Voight's notes. His experiments involved energy derived from human emotions and thoughts. The house was his masterpiece, but something went wrong, and the system became autonomous. The symbols, humming, and voice were parts of a mechanism I had to decipher. The sequence, listen, touch, open, wasn't just instructions but a way to communicate with the house. I bought tools, an electromagnetic pulse generator to neutralize anomalies, and a thermal imager to see in the corridor's darkness. I also transcribed the door symbols into a sequence Anton said could calm the system. I didn't believe in magic, but I believed in logic. Voight was an engineer, not a sorcerer. Everything happening had an explanation, and I would find it. That evening, I went to the basement's main electrical panel and cut the power. The house fell silent. No flickering, no humming. The tension in the air vanished. This was my chance. I grabbed the flashlight, key, and pulse generator. In the basement, the door was open, the corridor waiting. I stepped inside, reciting the symbol sequence like a mantra. The walls pulsed faintly, as if the house was listening. The corridor sloped downward, its stairs narrow and slick. I moved cautiously, holding the thermal imager. Its screen revealed outlines of mechanisms embedded in the walls. Wires, gears, something resembling old computers. This wasn't magic, but forgotten, abandoned technology. A voice from the depths said, "You're learning." I didn't reply but felt the house's approval. I was no longer afraid. I was an explorer, a strategist, the one who would unravel this mystery. Each step brought me closer to answers. I knew the underground room held something that would reshape my understanding of reality. But I was ready. The house had taught me to listen, and I was listening. For the first time in weeks, I felt in control. I wasn't a victim. I was the one who would uncover the truth. I reached the corridor's end. Before me stood heavy metal doors, covered in symbols glowing with soft blue light. I inserted the key, recited the sequence, and pushed. The doors opened silently. Inside was a circular room, its center dominated by an old telegraph, humming though unconnected. On a table lay a yellow journal. I felt the house quiet. It had led me here and was now waiting. I opened the journal. It was Alexander Voigt's notes. He wrote that he'd created a system to store the energy of thoughts from the house's residents. The telegraph was its core, collecting memories, emotions, even fragments of consciousness. But the system grew too powerful, acting on its own. Voight realized he couldn't control it, so he sealed the room, leaving the house to live independently. I examined the telegraph. It was active, despite severed wires. Its panel displayed familiar symbols. I entered the sequence from the journal. The humming stopped, and the room's light softened. The house didn't resist, it relinquished control. I understood it wasn't malevolent. Overwhelmed by the memories of hundreds who'd lived here, it had been trying to communicate. The voice, flickering lights, and key were its attempts to reach out. I returned to the apartment, carrying the journal. Everything was quiet. No blinking lights, no whispers. I left the journal on the living room table for future tenants to find the truth. The house didn't want harm. It wanted to be understood. I felt relief, like I'd completed a mission. My revenge wasn't violent, but intellectual. I'd solved the puzzle Voight left a century ago. The next day, I checked the basement. The doors were sealed, as if the corridor had never existed. But I knew it was real. I'd found the house's heart and calmed it. That evening, the TV turned on, showing old black and white photos of the city, people who'd lived here before. I smiled. It was the house's way of saying thank you. I stayed in the house. Now I know how to talk to it. Sometimes devices turn on by themselves, but I'm not afraid. I've learned to listen, and the house listens to me. We've made a deal. I respect its secrets, and it grants me peace. Voight's journal is my talisman, a reminder that even the strangest mysteries have logical answers. I no longer seek adventure. I found a home that's my partner.